We'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so we'll move on to oral communications. Any additions or deletions to tonight's agenda?
Changes.
Okay, and we do not have anyone here for public comment. So do we have any commissioner comments?
I just had one question. So there was a lawsuit filed against the city about the Verizon.
Yes.
I had just heard that.
You mean the cell tower on
The cell
41st?
tower on 41st Avenue that got denied by the
Yeah, the
county.
one that you approved. Yeah, so we had 2 lawsuits in about a week, so we're doing good.
And I had one more question. There was an application on Oak.
Yes.
That the staff's decision got appealed, and that goes to the council, not the planning commission?
Yeah, so it was a building permit. Staff's determination was that an interior remodel and residing the house did not require a design permit. The appellant contends that we issued that determination in error, and that the planting of poisonous plants is a public nuisance that staff failed to abate. So that's the basis of their appeal, and the council will consider that based on the staff's determination, not actually a permit.
Okay, because I was thinking that staff's decisions came to the planning commission.
Only if there's a discretionary permit involved, and our determination was that none applied to this project.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
And I did have one comment. I had sent a email to the Public Works Director and yourself, but it had to do with 114 Grand? Is that what it
Sounds
is?
right.
And they had painted outside the gate now, kind of giving the impression there's no parking there, which doesn't leave enough room for cars to park in front of that area. And this is, if you remember, this is that area that we had some discussion because they removed bollards when the staff report told them not to, up on Grand. And so I guess it is, you give them an inch, they'll take a mile is a good analogy on that one. And I don't know if we did. I understand the house is on the market now. It'd be something maybe to try to take care of before someone bought it, assuming they had this justification to this. I would find it hard to believe that we gave them a permit for that, but we never know. So we'll wait for follow-up on that one. And any other commissioner comments?
No, just to follow on to that comment, though, at least it should be disclosed to the Realtor, and then it will have to be disclosed to any potential buyers that there's a question about it.
Staff will look into it and inform appropriate parties.
Thank you. And with that, any more staff comments? You're kind of
Staff is
chatty
not.
tonight. So.
No additional comments.
All right, so we'll move into the continuation. That's the public hearing part of our zoning code update. And before our last meeting, we had a commissioner that missed, so Commissioner Smith would like to have just a couple of inputs on.
Yeah, just a
last
couple of
meeting.
things. First of all, I wanted to let you guys know that I did watch the whole thing, and really sorry I missed that meeting. It looked like it was not only fun, but it was really productive. I only had 2 comments. One of them had to do with the minutes from the May 5th meeting and the neon signs. And it got discussed, but the minutes say modify so all neon signs require planning commission approval. And it was my understanding in the discussion on May 5th that we were not going to be talking about the small, that hang in the restaurant window, as long as it meets the requirements of it can't take up too much space and et cetera. But we don't want every single neon sign that's hanging inside one of the restaurant windows to come to the planning commission. And I just wanted to clarify, that was my understanding of the discussion.
I think this is one that when we bring in the red lines, we should re-look at, because we did touch upon that, and it seemed like the consensus was to bring every neon sign to Planning Commission, from what I got out of the change to the minutes last time, unless the 3 of you are comfortable with making an allowance for the small signs that go up in the restaurants, if you'd
Well,
like
we
to
may
see
want
that.
everybody's
Yeah,
input on
my
this. For me,
recollection was we decided that all neon signs needed to come get a permit.
yeah,
But I'll make sure we touch upon that when we bring the red lines.
Okay.
because
We can note
there
in
are
minutes for
the
tonight.
temporary ones that they're not permanent, they may become permanent just because, but the ones that they just plug in the wall, they're not hardwired.
Yeah, right, and they hang
And
on the
they're,
inside,
uh,
not the outside.
When you start looking around, there are a lot of them out there. That's what I did notice.
Yeah, and I could, when it comes back, be comfortable with changing it about the ones that are inside, like inside a liquor store.
The gas station has a number, I noticed,
Yeah.
there's-
The other item was not from the minutes, it was covered in the last meeting, and nobody touched on, under non-conforming, the burden of proof. And I just wanted to comment on a rewording. And in one section on 92-2, item number C, I'm not sure burden's spelled
It's
correctly, but that is very strong language. And then in the findings on page 92-8, it's a little bit softer. And the issue the concern that I have is when property changes ownership, and this actually happened to me, so I'll give you a real live example. We bought a house on Prospect Avenue and then filed for a major remodel. Went through all the plans and everything, and during the remodel process, the building inspector came out, and there is a cantilevered extension on the second floor that comes out that at the time that we were doing the remodel made it non-conforming. And they didn't have any evidence that it had been built that way. But the only thing that I had showing that it had been built that way and built legally were photographs of when I bought it. And so somehow, I'd just like to see the wording between those two matched up a little bit more. So
Here's the other wording.
92-8A, it says available evidence indicates that the non-conforming use or structure was legally established.
It's under findings, not burden of proof on.
Correct.
92, yeah.
I'd just like to see that language ported back to the burden of proof, because yes, the person, applying to make the changes needs to provide, whatever available evidence they have, but unless the city comes up with evidence that says they snuck that in, I think if it was that way when the property transferred ownership, the new buyers are entitled to whatever they have, to a point.
See, I don't think the new buyers are entitled to whatever they have if it wasn't legally established, because
If it wasn't legally established.
if it wasn't
If it was
legally
legally
established.
non-conforming.
But I just don't think that they have the burden of proving that it was legally established prior to their ownership.
Well, I think that if, for example, if someone buys a piece of property and it has an illegal bathroom in the garage,
Yes.
and that bathroom's there and no one tells them, they just buy the house thinking that bathroom is a legal bathroom. If there are no building permits or anything for that garage conversion and the installation of that bathroom, it doesn't become legal just because someone sold their house and got away with selling it with something illegal in it.
92 just.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, that, you can soften up the language, but it is, if someone is claiming that, asserting a right to a non-conforming use, then they need to have some proof of that, not just, I bought the house and it was here. And if it is legal, there should be building permits, there should be, there are ways to go about doing that.
But if they have those things, the city has them. right? They are not going to, owners don't tend
But
to keep that
sometimes-
stuff for
but
50 years and
sometimes,
transfer it.
you know, someone can go and get letters from, you know, 3 people in the neighborhood who swear, I've lived here for, you know, 42 years, and this bedroom addition has been on this house, you know, for those 42 years. That kind of proof is not something that the city's going to have. That burden is on the applicant to find that, because if you go back, you know, a number of years, particularly in the 50s, there aren't city records for a lot of things.
Right.
But people have other ways of proving that
In some of
something
the
is
older
legal there.
neighborhoods, I would agree with you, but in some of the newer neighborhoods, I'm not sure that the owners, especially if they're new to the neighborhood, are going to be able to go find somebody who can vouch for the fact that that bathroom was put in legally back when we weren't keeping records. I just think
I
it should
did-
be a
I did-
shared
yeah.
thing, unless, rather than having the owner, the new owner, have to prove that it was legal. I think if there's not any evidence that says it wasn't legal, and if there's a remodel thing that doesn't include a bathroom and it's in our records, but I think when you buy a piece of property, unless there's a disclosure of some kind that says there's non-permitted stuff there, we have to be careful in to what extent the purchaser of the property has to prove that what they bought was legally built.
Yeah, I mean, I think it happens fairly regularly. It's not an incidental thing as far as planning departments and building departments are concerned. It comes up quite regularly, that someone has an addition that, or, you know, something, so they've converted it to units. I mean, you go on the
And
list.
a lot of
But-
those things are big and they're easy to prove. I'm just saying that, like the build out on my place, the only thing I had were photographs of what it looked like when I bought it, and as much information as I could get on when it was built and who built it, but I didn't have any building plans. And I had a reasonable building inspector who looked at it and said, yeah, you know, chances are it was built when it was really built. But it was a cooperative effort between the two of us. It wasn't,
Right,
you
but
know.
I still think the ordinance ought to require, you know, the burden be on the person who wants to show that this non-conforming one was legal, not the staff to prove that it was legal.
And maybe it'll help just to explain kind of the process. Commissioner Westman's right. I mean, everywhere I've ever worked, this is an issue that comes up fairly regularly. Anytime something like that comes in, we do an internal search. You know, do we have any records to show that it was done according to permit? And if it was, in most cases, we're going to find some record. We oftentimes don't have plans, but there'll be something in the assessor's book or something showing that improvement was done. When we don't find it, though, then the burden of proof has always been here, and I think most jurisdictions, that the property owner has to show it. It's really impossible to prove the negative. You know, if we don't have records, there's no way for us to say, well, yeah, you know, we can prove that you did it without a permit. So I don't know that it would be a good idea to have a blanket allowance for a non-conforming alteration to be permitted by virtue of sale. Some of the minor things, probably not a lot of harm, but there are the second units, the illegal conversions. And the other thing I would say is we always try to use a little bit of judgment. I mean, we'll look at something, how old does it look like it is? If it looks like it's been there for 40, 50 years, we often just say, that's fine.
And often rely on, you send your building inspector out and he looks at it and he says, this is not new construction.
Yeah.
This has been here a long time. You know, you accept and I've never worked in a city where they weren't cooperative about trying to solve the problem.
I mean, if it does help, we could write something in there. If, you know, if staff can find no evidence that appropriate permits were acquired, the property owner shall have the burden of proof.
I would just like to see it softened in the way that it's worded so that the burden of proof, I mean, what does it take to prove it, kind of thing. And
Well, I don't think you want to get into what does it take to prove it, because then you take away a lot of discretion that the community development director can have to say, okay, the building inspector said it looked old, you know, we don't have any real reason, you know, I don't think you want to come up with a list which says this is what you have to do that. Sort of leave it open-ended.
Is that good?
I mean, just like in
You have
your
any
situation, it was
insight?
resolved. 99% of the times, you know, they get resolved.
Yeah.
It is a working,
And we're not going to charge the owners a bunch of fees to go through our archives to look for evidence. That's going to be part of the overall.
No, we
Process.
would typically, you know, do a record search without charging anyone. I mean, ordinarily, I think it would either be in response to a code enforcement complaint or as part of some new project.
a lot of them are resolved through the assessor's office. They, in many cases, have better records than cities do, and that's, you know, one place you go and look.
Maybe if you just added the words "in cooperation with the city," that softens it enough that says, hey, this is a joint thing. When I read it, it just really jumped out as, you know, I'd hate to buy a bungalow in Capitola if I'm going to have to prove that it's all.
I'll jump in here. I like it the way it is. And I think the buyers and realtors should be pretty careful about making sure they know what exists and what their obligations are. So the brighter line we have, the better from that standpoint. People buying into properties.
I actually had this exact issue, and so when we looked at the assessors, the county assessors, it threw a whole different set of circumstances. So, and we were able to work it out with the city. I feel comfortable we can do that. I mean, it took a while to get to a compromise, but, you know, I felt like it worked out in my situation, and that's exactly what it was. It had an older addition that, when I bought it, had been there for obviously a long, single-wall construction, been there a long time. But it wasn't on the county assessors, so they knew it was probably built illegally, so you just kind of got to go through those issues, but it can be difficult. You know, I missed something, and really, so I'm going to start with this, but I don't know why why do I actually, there's no one in the audience, right? But if somebody's watching at home, they don't need to know that they can watch this at home, but I'm going to read it anyway because it's in front of me. So it says, this meeting is cablecast live on Charter Communications, for those of you watching at home, Channel 8, and AT&T UVerse Channel 99, and is being recorded for future viewing. Meetings can also be viewed at the city's website, cityofcapitola.org. Our technician tonight is Alex Saidi, so that's good. You didn't know who our technician is. And so that's it. I did my due justice, my diligence.
Check now.
Yeah. Okay, so did you have something else?
That's
you
it.
missed?
That's all I had.
Okay, so we're caught up, and we have Commissioner Newman with us now, so we'll just move on, I guess, with our staff report where we left off.
I was just stalling for you, Ed.
Okay, thank you. Tonight, we're here for the Special Planning Commission to discuss the update to the new Capitola zoning code. Quick overview, within the new Capitola zoning code, there's a user guide that walks you through how to utilize the new code. Part 1 is enactment and applicability. Part 2 is the zoning districts and overlays, so the specific regulations associated with each zone and overlay zone. Part 3 is the citywide standards, of which we are about 2/3 of the way through, and we'll be continuing with tonight. Part 4 is permits and administration, and we'll probably hit upon some of those this evening as well. And Part 5 is the glossary. So when we met last, we left off on self-storage facilities, so that's where we'll pick up this conversation. It was 17.96.150. And within the self-storage facilities, it's in the community commercial as a conditional use permit is listed. And within the regional commercial, it's prohibited within the land use table. There is a reference in the code within this section that it's applicable to both the community commercial and the regional commercial, so we'll make that modification to take it out of regional commercial. But with that, any comments on that section of code?
Under B, required findings, item 1 says location of the proposed self-storage facility is not conducive to traditional retail due to limited access or poor visibility from the street. I hate to be wordsmithing, but, you know, if we look at Nob Hill Shopping Center down here, we have that one indoor storage, and I don't know that it's not conducive to, it's probably still conducive to retail. So I don't know, I was just thinking maybe that it's better suited, instead of not conducive to traditional, maybe it was worded something different, like better suited than traditional retail. I don't know. I would still consider that shopping area conducive to
See,
retail.
that's a huge space there, you know, it goes way back, and I think when you look at the size of the space,
It's not conducive to
I
retail?
wouldn't say it was conducive to retail to use all of it.
It's just wordsmithing, so I don't,
Yeah, but I don't care. I mean,
I just thought it seems like if it's not conducive, it makes it a pretty hard find.
I think we might be able to work on that language a little bit and say the location and the characteristics of the property or building, or, you know, broaden it up a little bit. 'Cause I agree, that could be a kind of a
I
thorny.
remember Craig French saying that that's the reason he put the storage in there, was that they were,
Having difficulty
yeah.
keeping
that
retail in there.
it was not he didn't use that term, but the concept.
because it was the County Office of
Yeah, he
Education
just
for
couldn't
years
rent
and
that
years
to,
and years.
retail. Yeah.
But if someone took up that corner piece and it went all the way in, I don't know. Yeah. I get what it's trying to say, so it's okay.
Pretty vague concept.
I guess really I'm just trying to show that I actually read it, that's all.
Any other comments?
Nope.
Okay, we'll move on to solar energy systems. And there were no edits in this section that were proposed.
You know, I did have a question about this because we had a redesign for a solar that came before us a year or two ago on Monterey, where they built a mansard roof to hide solar panels, of which they've set up a nice little rooftop camping area, but there are no solar panels 2 years later. So I understand that the state really is pushing, and it kind of leaves a lot of leniency for solar stuff, but what is the follow-up on that if no one actually puts the panels there too?
That was right when I got hired here, and I believe, so I don't know all the details of it. I don't know if there was a variance for the mansard roof or not. I don't think there was.
Well, I remember
think
we
it's within
approved
the
it
height
because to hide the solar panels was the reason we approved it, but now there's still no solar panels, but they set up their little camping tents and stuff up there during the summer and have rooftop access. It's kind of hidden to some degree, but, so if we're going to, I'm all for allowing for that, obviously we have to, but is there a follow-up process to say, are you actually putting the solar panels there? Because we give a lot of leniency in the process. Just a question, I don't,
Yeah, to me, that seems like a conditioning issue with a permit, and I don't recall that project, but, you know, it should have been worded in such a way that if you're enjoying the privilege of additional height, you have to actually put in the solar panels.
Or if it was an access issue of not turning it into a rooftop deck, it should have been conditioned to not be a rooftop deck.
And it may have been.
So we can look into that.
well, I'm just curious how that, it seems like, I just want to make sure that there's a way to follow. If we're going to give this much leniency to the process, then just have some follow-up on that.
You're not suggesting any edits to the language in the ordinance. This is,
No, it just, when I started reading this, I'm going, we approved this site, and it was based, the reason we approved the mansard style was to hide the solar panels. So that was the reason the permit came through, but there's never been solar panels. So now they have a nice hidden rooftop place to get away and without the clutter of solar panels in their way.
So I think we should condition those better in the future would be the, right? Or-
I mean, we could specify that the additional height is for the solar panels themselves, not screening features or something else, so that's a different process if they want a height variance.
Right, that's what I was wondering about if.
Because it has a
it may-
4-foot
Right.
Yeah.
Make certain the wording is clear that, the rooftop solar system may project up to 4 feet.
Well, I think we don't allow rooftop decks, right?
Right.
So we, in essence, approved this rooftop deck because absent the solar panels, it's a great area to, it's a pretty nice setup. I mean, they set up some nice tents up there, and they have their...
Is it Monterey in the Village or up heading
Yeah,
on
on the
Cliffwood
village, if you pull it
Heights?
up, you can probably see it. It's Monterey at, what's that first cross street when you come down Monterey to the right, that's real tight turn there?
Jerry?
El
To get onto
Camino
Cherry.
Medio?
Well, it's across the street from El Camino Media on the other side.
They had a banner up forever advertising the roofing company, but we had,
This is a
it's
private dwelling, it's a,
Oh, somewhere in here.
next to the superintendent
it's, yeah,
building,
it's
before the
just, it's
superintendent
just
building on
north
that
of
right-hand
the
corner.
superintendent's building, right? North of that little shopping area?
One of
What's
these.
that? It's a dress shop down, it's mixed use?
No, it's actually, it's before that, it was right on that,
Oh,
I can't remember the name
I'm
of that
thinking right
street.
now.
You know when you want to sneak through the village because the traffic's too backed up, you make that right turn? It's after Fanmore, it's in between Fanmore and Capitol.
Well, is that Cherry that comes out?
Yeah, but it's not called Cherry, I forget the name.
Okay, here we go.
This one
So
here.
that one right there, yeah, the one, if you, what is the name of it? Park Place, that's it. So that one has a full mansard roof around it now? That corner one you just had your arrow on? Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah, right there. There you go. So, it's kind of, so now it's just a nice little place to hang out. I don't blame them. I mean, it's a nice setup up there. You can see it from, obviously, up above at Depot Hill. You can look down on top of it, but
How do they access it?
there's a scuttle, there's like a open bulkhead scuttle that goes up through there.
Interesting.
Yeah, they have like a little door that pops out of the roof and the stair, like a roof access. So,
Well, we'll let staff
but I
look
think,
into that one.
do you recall, we approved this because of solar panels, from what I recall, the reason we allowed that roof
Yeah, I
change.
wasn't around for that one.
Okay, sorry to drag us in the weeds. We'll
Okay.
move on.
So, any other comments for solar energy systems? No. Okay, we'll move on to the Soquel Creek Pathway Bulkheads Index. And this is to
Talking
guide
about
development
getting in
along
the
the
weeds,
path.
this one really gets down in the weeds here. I understand the intent of it, but do we really care, like, the bulkhead should be constructed in a rustic manner and finished in wood? Does it have to be, can it just not be rustic?
This was
the
taken
bulk-
from the existing code, this,
Okay.
but.
Yeah,
We can
personally,
change it.
I would sort of take out the bulkhead part of it, because bulkheads are, what goes into the river that faces the
Right.
river. And a lot of them are steel.
Yeah, or what if people wanted to...
They rust and
Yeah,
turn
what if people
brown.
wanted to put a nice rock one, or, I don't know. It just seems like by saying it has to be finished in wood is like making it kind of specific, but
And the only 2 freestanding lights up to 8 feet allowed on each deck.
Yeah,
That's certainly not something that's followed. Everybody strings up lights and does all sorts of things out there. So personally, I would take out section B.
So the handrails, height of the handrails is otherwise,
that's
Regulated.
42 inches.
I'm okay with taking it out.
I didn't say, I also had the lighting question is why it's so specific to 2 8-foot lights, but I assume it was probably written a long time ago before we had all the new lighting abilities. So I'm open to removing it, but I don't know if there has some other historical reasoning for being there.
One other comment that I had, and we've had issues with this in the past, and I don't know how you really put it in here, but the property owners shouldn't be allowed to flood the area with water, which they have been known to do, and then it creates a real mess. If their landscaping runs across the pathway. And I don't know how you put that in there, but there's a lot about maintaining the structures and everything else, somehow irrigation needs to be managed so that it doesn't.
Maybe on number 4 where it says property owners shall trim and maintain landscaping, and maybe you could say an irrigation system so it doesn't encroach into the pathway.
And maybe covered by stormwater and kind of water conservation standards. Staff can look into that and see if there's other regulations that pertain to it, and if not, maybe we'll look at the code for a way to address it.
For clarity, within the bulkhead and decks, under 2, deck handrails may not exceed 42 inches in height. The space between the deck and the handrails may not be filled in to create a solid appearance. I think that's a good standard so that people can continue to see the SoCal Creek, and probably important because as over time, if people start to infill and go beyond the 42 inches in height or create solid railings.
You could just add that to the section on SoCal Creek pathway.
Okay, we'll move that
As you're talking
up.
about the fence along the pathway.
If we lost that, it might change things
Good comment.
towards the detriment. Okay. Okay, we'll move on to we're going to pass over temporary sidewalk dining. We discussed that at the last meeting. So we'll go to temporary uses and structures. So this codifies a lot of the administrative permits that occur over the counter, such as the temporary sales that are allowed twice a year, and also puts in the code the outdoor fundraising events, on-site construction yards. So a lot of the temporary things that occur that it'd be nice to have some regulations when a temporary use seems to go on forever. We can go out and we've got something in the code that says, you really need a permit for this, and you weren't supposed to do this for 3 years. It's really limited to 2 months. So any comments on those changes?
I just question if 2 weeks is long enough for storage containers, but as long as, if they think they're going to need it for longer, they can come in and ask for it, because sometimes it might take people longer than that just to pack it up to move. So I'm okay with the 2 weeks.
Okay, we'll move on to unattended donation boxes. Within unattended donation boxes, this requires an administrative permit from the Community Development Director, and it also requires the review of the police. So this is one of the boxes where people drop off donations such as clothing and goods. The location, it's allowed in the community commercial and the regional commercial zoning districts. The standards include the condition of the box, it must be upkept. The box also must be secured. They must have a schedule for when the box will be emptied. They're only allowed on a property that has a minimum of 20,000 square feet. If they're going to be on adjacent properties, they must be at least 400 feet of separation between the two boxes. And you're not allowed to put a box on required parking. This is, we have these along 41st Avenue in some areas, and they can be very problematic with the police department. So we've added that review to make sure that Chief Escalante or the chief at the time can.
So I would like to see something in there that these donation boxes are for nonprofit organizations, because the ones that are in the mall right now are for a for-profit organization.
I think that's a good change. And another one we might want to consider after seeing some of the new ones that popped up on 41st is that they're not facing the sidewalk like the three, I think, that are
Right.
currently in front of the mall are.
Right.
And this is just a nit, but in the first paragraph, it should either be an unattended donation box or strike the and leave it boxes.
Any other comments?
So do we really want to allow these in town? I mean, we've never allowed them before.
Well, right now, we don't have anything that overtly prohibits them, and so it's been kind of a challenge. That's where we wrote this, at least there was a permit and had some standards, but That's a good policy call.
I mean, I would love to prohibit them because they start getting stuff piled around
Well,
them.
that's why I was looking to see if it really says anything about stuff being
And we
around.
do have the Goodwill. So there is a place where people can drop all the same stuff
That's actually a building, yeah, so.
on 41st.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of having these unintended donation boxes. There's one at the gas station on Bay Avenue, and it often has stuff all piled around it. I mean, I just, St. Vincent de Paul, all those others will come to your house and pick up stuff. All you have to do is call them and ask. I don't see the purpose of having.
Ben, do you have any experience with what other jurisdictions are doing with this issue?
I was just trying to think of an example of a jurisdiction prohibiting them entirely, and off the top of my head, I can't think of one. This language in here is modeled off of what some other communities have done to address this issue. I'm scratching my head trying to think if there are any sort of legal concerns with prohibiting them outright, but nothing comes to mind immediately.
I mean, we at least need something in here about, if stuff is left around and they're probably a little more clearer, because this just talks about the box being maintained. It doesn't talk about,
That's what I was looking for. I didn't see anything specific to that, but
I think there are some organizations that do a lot of, good things with donated stuff. I don't think we should ban them completely, but I agree there should be something in here that requires that they be maintained and that we can have them removed if they're not. So if you have one that's a mess,
well, the thing, I think, I almost agree that, I mean, we have a number of places where we can take, whether it's Gray Bears or in Capitola, the Goodwill, St. Vincent de Paul comes to the house. I don't know that we need these boxes sitting there because they seem to overflow and have stuff sitting outside, so.
I mean, the boxes we have right now are a nonprofit group. They collect the clothing and then they resell it for a profit. And I think, I don't know, why do we let somebody put up a box to, it's like we're letting them operate a business without.
that's a good point.
I did do a quick Google search. Looked like there have been some jurisdictions in California and nationally that have banned them, so it's not completely unheard of.
Yeah,
I just as soon ban them.
I don't have anything against it.
Somebody came in with wanted to have one as part of an permanent outdoor display, they could do that and get a conditional use permit for it.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I think we have a number of places to donate to, so.
I don't think that would work, would it?
Oh, I think it would.
The outdoor permanent display,
Special event.
maybe for, okay.
You okay
So
with that?
is there consensus
Looks like
to ban them?
Looks like we're all in.
Okay.
So,
Ordinance smaller.
yeah,
go. Take that out of
for that. The existing unattended donation boxes, would they continue as a legal non-conforming accessory structure, or would they need to be removed, and should there be some sort of time period for that?
We can see if there's permits for any of them, I guess, to see, but I don't think there are, so I think they would be not legal status. But we'll keep them in the use table as prohibited.
Nonprofit charities that want to do those kinds of things, the ones, I know the one at the gas station and I know the ones at the mall are not nonprofit boxes. I called one of them, backed it down.
And so
So-
I would suggest in the ordinance a statement saying that these are prohibited, so that it's clear.
And grandfather if they're permitted, if you find a permit for any of them, and if not, they have to go away.
And we can leave them probably listed in the land use table with the dash for prohibited, to make it clear. Okay. well,
And
that-
TJ keeps bringing one up that was permitted for the park, McGregor Park?
Sounds like that,
But that was
It's
not
not
an
there.
unintended box, that was going to be an attended
right.
box.
And that one, you said the company went out of business, or they're not?
I don't know if they went out of business, but they're no longer pursuing it.
Yeah, good.
There's no plans to put a collection facility there.
So when that park is done and open, if it's not there, then does that permit to put one there expire?
Well, your permit expires 2 years if you don't establish use and reliance on it, so I think we could probably make that case.
But they were going to have an attendant there,
Yeah, that's
is my
right.
understanding. It's not an unintended.
Do we want to talk about attended? Or do you think that should just tie into a conditional use permit for a
I
business?
think that should just tie into a conditional use permit.
Okay. Okay. So next is mobile home conversions, Chapter 17, 100. This is the same language that was in our old code. It is regulated by the state, and I don't think there were modifications made to this chapter. And our city attorney has reviewed it and directed us to leave it as is.
How many
Yeah, I
parks-
think that's worked real well. We haven't been sued on any of the conversions that have taken place, and there've been a number of them,
How
so.
many parks would this apply to now?
I think there's only 2 parks left that aren't either subdivided or co-ops. Those have long-term affordability provisions in place, but, they still could convert.
The one up on Cliff.
Surf and Sand is subdivided now.
Urban Sand
Is
subdivided.
it Cabrillo, the one near the industrial?
Yeah, Cabrillo
The industrial area.
and
Turner Lane's a co-op.
Brookvale.
Brookvale's like.
Brookvale's
yeah,
been subdivided.
subdivided, yeah.
There might only be 1 left then. It's 1 or
I
2.
think there's only one.
We have some on 38th, right? That was partially.
But Castle's a co-op, I think.
That's co-op,
isn't it?
that's right.
Well, the city lived that one not too long ago, so I'm sure we're good.
And we're skipping over wireless communications this evening because our city attorney is reviewing that currently, and then we'll be implementing red lines and then bringing you forward the wireless in June.
And we have active litigation on the ordinance, so.
Right.
Might be July or later. So we are entering into Part 4, the permits and administration. And the first item is administrative responsibility. This starts on page 108-1. So the purpose statement is pretty straightforward. It's to organize the administration of permits. The planning agency defines the planning agency as the city council, planning commission, and community development director as the functioning parts of the agency. The review and decision-making authority, there's a table that goes through exactly what occurs at which level and who's making decisions and where a decision is made or an appeal is made or a recommendation. Are there any comments regarding that table?
I like the table. Is it going to be some form of like interactive process on, if somebody's coming with a permit process, so it shows who they need to talk to and, the process for them, like an easy to follow.
So, yes, from this table, the additional chapters after it will explain exactly what the process is for each type of permit.
But I'm talking like on the online, is there going to be through like a interactive? You're raising your eyebrows like, yes, it is.
Would be a great way to go in the future, but I don't know.
I think a longstanding project of ours is to improve the website and transparency and, guidance for customers.
Right.
It's an ongoing project.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something we'd like to do.
But this is definitely going to be on there, so they
Oh,
can
yeah, no, this
follow
table's there,
straight
so
through
this is
one.
great.
The table and the subsequent, when I was reading through it, it was like, oh, now I know.
Yeah, no, it's much clearer than the process.
And we'll probably need to add conceptual review to this table.
Yeah.
And we'll be bringing you a conceptual review chapter as well.
Reasonable accommodation, what does that mean
Oh.
in the table?
So reasonable accommodation is a type of permit that we'll actually go over that in another chapter, but I did get your edit to add a definition of that, so we will add a definition to the glossary. So the last section is the Design Review Committee, and I'll go over this because there's a slight modification in the Design Review Committee. This is replacing the Architectural and Site Review Committee. They do preliminary recommendations to the applicant on design permits. It's important that it's known that it's a recommendation to the applicant. It's not a recommendation to the Planning Commission, so it doesn't fall under the Brown Act, is my understanding, because it's not a formal recommendation to Planning Commission. Next, the membership is, there's 2 architects. One is appointed and the other is a city-hired consultant, and that's the new position that will be within this group. And the second architect will only review multifamily projects, non-residential projects, and other significant projects that come through the city. There's also a landscape architect that is appointed, a historian who is appointed, and then the city staff includes planning, public works, and building. So the only real change is the consultant for the
So
architect.
do we have qualifications for the historian?
You know, they're not codified. I think, you know,
I mean,
it's-
I only ask because I have a great deal of respect for Frank Berry. I think he's doing a great job in the museum. I know Carolyn Swift did it for a while, and, you know, Carolyn had a lot of knowledge and history about Capitola, even though she wasn't technically a historian. And, you know, since we're going to start talking about, you know, a historical section in our ordinance, I think if we're going to say this committee is going to have a historian on it, there needs to be some definition, some criteria for what that person's qualifications are. It can't be just somebody who's been around town a long time.
When we do get to the historic preservation chapter, there will be specific qualifications for the person who reviews historic applications. And the state has a list of the state certified architectural historians. That will be a requirement. We're going to talk to you about making that a contract position as well, so that we have consistency of who is reviewing those applications. And we'll also, within the code, add the step that the consultant would have to review the application prior to it going to the new design review committee, so that those comments that are made by the consultant's prior review, the historian, the local historian will have those comments to review at that time at the Ark and
So
Site
would we
Committee.
want to have this person we're going to contract with, that historian, be this historian on the Architectural and Site Review Committee, so you have that consistency? I mean, this whole idea of having a historian on the Ark and Site Committee was a fairly new one. And as I said, it worked pretty well when Carolyn was around, just
My
because she had a
understanding,
sense.
she's still on the
She is.
Architect Committee.
She is.
Last time I talked to her, she was
Yes.
still the appointed historian.
Right, but she's not going to be doing it for much. She and I talked, and I don't think she plans on doing it for much longer. So I just, for the future, no
on the-
disrespect to Carolyn, I think she's great, but
On the Design Review Committee, and maybe we'll talk about this when we get to the historical part, I didn't tie the two together. It didn't seem to me the Design Review Committee is involved in the historical side of it. And if they're not, then I'm wondering why you need a historian on the Design Review Committee.
I don't think you need a historian on the Design Review Committee.
I don't think so.
I
I mean, what Carolyn has always done was just look at it and see if it's a historical site, and if it's not, then she sort of bows out and doesn't really have a lot of input on the Ark and Site Committee.
I think that's probably true for the majority of cases, that, most don't involve any kind of historic structures. I think and specifically Carolyn, I think with her knowledge of Capitola has been valuable, is that she can talk about a lot of the history that, staff isn't going to know otherwise, and we don't have it well documented. But that role could certainly be filled by our museum curator, the director over there, in the future if Carolyn decides to bow out. There is a job qualification in place for that requires them to have historical knowledge and education and training. But we could also do without it and consult with them as another staff member on the side.
Right, because if it's a historical structure, you're going to have the historian working with the designer on that structure. So why would you have that historian working with somebody and then have another historian on the Ark and Site Committee? It just doesn't really make sense to me unless they're going to be the same people.
I think it could potentially add confusion to the process for the applicant if there were an instance in which the other historian didn't agree or something like that. So I think it's a good recommendation, as long as we codify that the state certified historian does the review prior to Ark and Site. So that
And that goes along with, I thought we were trying to get to a point where it was primarily staff people and not people at large in the community on this design review committee.
So, we had a lot of discussion both with the Planning Commission and Council, and how it came out was virtually unchanged with the exception of adding the second architect. And one of the things we should talk about is what's the threshold for bringing in that second architect. I think we define it as a major project, but what is that? But otherwise, it's relatively unchanged. We changed the name. From my standpoint, one of the things I think is a flaw in the system is that, sorry to correct you, but it is a Brown Act committee. We often don't run it, certainly like a planning commission meeting, and then we do have a project that's a little more controversial. Public comes, they expect some decision to be made, we kind of change our format, and it's clumsy. From my perspective, just, purely administrative, I would prefer that it would be staff. We sit in a room, we have these people, we educate the applicant, and it's not really a public meeting necessarily. But looking through the records, I think there was a desire historically in Capitola for that to be the case.
For the city council thought, because I thought we were on agreement it was more than staff.
I thought we were all in agreement it was going to be more of a staff group that met.
Right.
But if you had a major project, there was going to be an architect that was going to be on a retainer that you all could bring in to be of assistance to you on, controversial big ones, you're having difficulty working with the applicant to solve the problem.
I do recall a fair amount of discussion at the city council about the merits of using sort of the volunteer experts that we have today versus contracting out. There was some concern about the cost implications to applicants of us hiring high-paid consultants to do that work instead of volunteers. And I think where they ended up was kind of keeping it status quo, more or less.
I remember a bunch of discussion about landscaping being part of that, and we don't really have a landscape person on staff, so that would be...
Well, and this says a landscape architect, and it's my understanding, off and on you have a landscape architect, but typically they're landscape designers, not architects, because you can't find a landscape. Once Mike Arnone quit doing it, there hasn't been a real landscape architect doing it. So
That's been the case with the architect as well at times.
right, it's just a building designer. I mean, when we had Derek doing it, and I think Frank was this architect.
I have my issue and options matrix, and there were some changes definitely that took place at the city council level. When it was reviewed by planning commission, the direction was that all positions on the committee should either be staff or a contracted position. When we got to, and you had taken out the historian in the list of participants. And then when it got to city council, the city council said the city was to contract an architect to review substantial projects, and that also the city to continue requiring review of historic modifications by a contracted architectural historian outside of the Ark and Site Committee. But then they told us to keep the historian, the appointed local historian, within that committee. So that's how it's drafted today. And we can bring that to the attention of the city council that there's a desire to take out the position of historian within the Ark and Site Committee.
Yeah, I mean,
Due to
I
it being
think
covered.
I don't know, I think there's a desire to do more than just take out the historian.
Yeah, but we've been
I
overruled.
think we've been trumped, so it's like,
Well,
But, you know, we haven't been overruled. I mean, this is one time where we have to come to an agreement.
well, I think more of the issue too was talking about using architects who work in our environment, and then it just became a real cumbersome discussion, I think, and so we thought it would be easier to have staff making judgments about issues that weren't as subjective as other.
I mean, I don't think that a lot of applicants think the current system works particularly well.
I think the review was that they did like the design, they gave them some insight. I think people like that concept, they liked getting the feedback, I remember that. I just think sometimes the feedback can be potentially misleading if you have a volunteer who has a position, and he's looking at someone else's work, and becomes subjective.
Yeah, during the stakeholder input, there was a mix of reviews. People found it very confusing. They found the term Ark and Site Committee very confusing, thinking that their
They
design
thought they
was
were getting it
approved.
right.
And in fact, it was just slight a recommendation. And then there were also people that really valued the preliminary feedback they got on the process from internal staff, so that they knew as they went about after Planning Commission what the other steps were. So
Well, I'm still under the impression that I like the concept of having staff do the review, and any contract with any special groups, but if that's.
I would point out, too, the council direction was not united. There was some differing opinions there, and again, my personal opinion is it would work a little more efficiently, albeit at probably some higher cost to an applicant.
I would go with TJ's recommendation.
Which was our original recommendation, right? Just stick
that
with,
it be staffed by staff
That
only
it
and
be
have
staff by staff, that you have an architect, you know, available, you contract with an architect that you can bring them in for, and you read a list of, you know, major projects, and you might want to define major projects a little more clearly, or not just say major, you could even say, you know, projects of high community interest, or, so even if you had a smaller one that was controversial, you guys would have a way to get some help.
I have a whole different slant on this, which I come at it from the standpoint that I don't particularly like to see the Planning Commission function as a workshop. We get an applicant up there, and then we start talking about, well, maybe if you move the windows over here, and, you know, we're redesigning the project, and we're supposed to be a decision-making body, not a workshop. And so I don't know if the Ark and Site Committee, how it helps or hurts that process, but that's the issue that is most important to me, is that we be a policy, we deal with conflicting policy. We not sit around here and design things.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I agree with you on that, and I personally, I think the way this committee is set up, that there's going to be major difficulties. I don't think they're going to be able to find a volunteer architect, so then you have to, you know, change and say, oh, well, we'll accept just a building designer. I don't think they're going to find a volunteer landscape architect. I don't think, you know, you always have a Carolyn Swift around who has history with your community to be the historian. So the way this is set up, I think it's going to create issues for staff and for the I mean, typically, I think in a lot of cities, it is done by staff, and, you know, they work out all of the issues with the applicant, and by the time it comes to the Planning Commission, it really is about policy decisions, not design decisions, because I don't think we're designers.
my wife can tell you I'm not, so.
I don't look at the color boards. I just want you to know that. You can pass them around, but I don't even look at them.
Yeah, my experience, since I've been here with the Ark and Site Review Committee, is they don't review the applications with as close of an eye of detail as the Planning Commission, and that's been one of the problems. Applicants go before them, often say it's great, everything looks wonderful. They come here, it's a lot more critical, things change and they're shocked. And I think that's been one of the issues.
I'm going to throw a different twist on it just to get it out on the table. I agree with most everything that you've said. And with all due respect to staff, I think you guys work really closely with applicants coming into the process. The city council are elected by the community, and by having the appointment process, they have an ability to inject some influence into the design review process. And that may be really important to some of them at least. If it all moves to staff and you guys work on the design and get it all nailed down, and then it comes to the Planning Commission and we have issues with it and do our little design thing, which is, it would be ideal not to do it, but I think Planning Commissions change and everybody wants their fingers in that pie. It's going to put the staff in a bit more of a dicey position if we don't like what you've negotiated with the applicants right up front. So I don't know, I'm kind of torn on
Yeah, I
whether you
don't
want
see
to
that. I think it
appoint it
takes
or.
away some subjectivity for the applicant and maybe some confusion by those appointments. And to me, I think it's a lot more objective.
What happens when you get somebody on the architect who gives the applicant direction that the staff knows because they take projects through all the time, it's just going to blow everything up? I mean,
Yeah, that's another way to look at it.
I mean, I think that what this part of the process is about is for the applicant to understand what the requirements are about stormwater, the issues that the building inspector has.
Well, they get all that today from the staff members that are there, but they also get, landscaping input, because landscaping is really important to the Planning Commission, and they get some level of, historical anointment that, they don't need to worry about it, or they do need to worry about it, and then they get some kind of design input.
So it's tied to a design permit. So the only time it goes to Arkansas is if it's a design permit. So if it's, and we'll be talking about that tonight when it would go. But it really is tied to the design. Otherwise, you might want to rename it as a development review committee, and that's the function of that, is to explain what are the necessary steps to get through an application where, but it really is, this committee is tied directly to the design permit. We've taken signs there before just because if it's a questionable sign, and we've had the architect there, but within this draft code, it's very specific that, signs won't be going to this. It's just for a design permit. So it really is tied to the design.
Well, it gets much more subjective because now the mayor is appointing these individuals, and how does that appointment happen? Based on their merit, their education, their knowledge, their abilities, or?
That's the same process that's in place today.
And I think that's a concern, or it's a problem. So it just leads to more confusion or subjectivity in my mind.
And I think
And,
Prefer staff do it, that
Yeah.
maybe staff members, okay?
I think the limiting factor has been the number of applications.
Right.
I think it's been difficult to get qualified folks to apply to volunteer their time.
I was going to say, over the years, and, probably 20-something years working with it, the success of the committee absolutely depended on who was the architect who was on there. You had good years when you had an architect who was willing to donate their time, and they gave good comments that were understandable by the applicant and, were willing to work with them. I've seen years where, the architect hardly comes to the meetings, and when they do, there's very little in the way of advice and comments. So it's, it's very, up and down how it functions, and I don't think that's a good long-term plan. And if we had it where staff was doing it, but they had a contract architect they could bring in when staff felt they needed that extra help, it would be of benefit to the applicant, even though it would cost them a little money. It would be a benefit to staff and ultimately the planning commission to have the process work that way.
And I would add that is not an uncommon arrangement to have a town architect as a contract employee who can be brought in to advise on design-related issues.
So are we okay kind of going back to the city council and saying, thank you for your input, but
We want to stick,
That's not what we think should happen.
But we've decided.
I'm good sticking to where we were before, and maybe,
Me too.
they can reverse it again if they want.
and then, maybe have some discussion about, I'm sure you represented us well in that discussion of what our
Well,
concerns
I
were. but-
think if they do reverse it, they have to send it back to us and get us to concur with that reversal.
Okay.
I think, we try to. I think as we go through these hearings, it would be helpful on some of the issues if we had a planning commission representative at some of the meetings to discuss your perspective. I think that would be helpful in the discussions. We will have
Our
to
chair
circle.
will be happy to take on this
Oh, yeah, I
particular
like
topic.
coming.
For volunteering.
There you
I'd love
go.
to talk to the mayor about this.
So just to make sure we have clarity on what the decision is, do you want to summarize that maybe?
I think
Sure.
Go,
So
Katie.
what we'll do is, under the membership, it will have the membership as listed, except it will list one architect and one architect. The landscape architect, I think, is scratched from the process, and one historian. But under appointments, under C2 will list that, that there's an appointed architect as well as an appointed architectural historian.
when-
I-
when
Although
needed,
maybe the
Took out the
architectural,
historian.
so we'll have one appointed architect. The architectural historian will become part of the historic
right,
requirements in
right.
another chapter. And
And I think that as far as the landscaped architect is concerned, to get a permit, to get a water meter or anything, everybody's got to go to Soquel Creek Water District, and now their landscape people look at it, and they often override what the landscape person in Capitola was asking for.
Well,
So that created another conflict.
Yeah, and I think the staff knows what the requirements are, so when, it's more of a timing issue and those requirements, so I think that can be well, because then it adds that, again, that subjectivity. Rich, I know you've been.
Yeah, I think there would be, based on your direction, what I would suggest is, one, I wouldn't call it a design review committee. It's really not a committee.
Right.
That's a process.
Right.
And I would ditch the appointments as well. It would be something where we'd go out, we'd put out an RFP.
Right.
And hire these folks. So it makes it really informal.
So if you're doing that, then there is a landscape, somebody who's going to feed in information, because when I go through the Arkansas site recommendations of projects that come to the Planning Commission, it seems like more often than not, there's been landscaping input on what kinds of plants and the height and the articulation of the plants and it's not a water thing, it's more about how is this landscaping going to look? So I'd hate not to have anybody looking at that except for, building people.
I agree. I think my suggestion would be, and the way I think I would approach it, is if this were passed at the end of the day, is we put out an RFP for an architect that had access to a landscape architect and a architectural historian, whether sub-consultants are on that team. So you had one company and those services could all be provided under one agreement. But I do see a benefit of having a landscape professional available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you rewrite it, somehow I would hate for landscaping not to be mentioned.
And what were we going to call it? Not a design review committee, but what were we going to call it again?
Well, I mean, you could just call it design review, you could call it design review process,
Okay.
could call it a team,
Or board?
but it just wouldn't be a committee as we traditionally think of traffic and
it's a
parking.
process.
Yeah.
That way you don't get into Brown Act stuff, maybe calling it a committee or any of that.
Okay, we'll move on to the next item. Is that clear, Ben? Okay. Permit.
We'll work out the details.
Okay, we'll work out the details. Next is permit application and review. So this really just goes through the exact steps when you come in for a permit application and what an applicant should be prepared for. It talks about the pre-application and filing, so it suggests that an applicant should come in early and talk with the community development staff. It also goes into application fees and just review, relates to the fee schedule that's been adopted by City Council, and also explains the requirements of payment and how refunds and withdrawals are handled. Under application review, it explains the review for completeness, and then it goes into all the steps for completeness and what happens if you have an incomplete application and timing. Multiple permit applications.
Question before you
Sure.
move to the multiple. The pre-application conference and then the processing, where does the design review fit in between those two?
In the design permit chapter, it talks about where the design review would, so the design review is after the application has been formally submitted.
Okay, so you have your pre-conference, then they go do the application, then you do the design review, okay?
Yes. Any other comments before I jump into multiple permit applications? So the multiple permit applications just specifies that if you have more than one application at once, if you have, say, a change to the zoning as well as a review of a multifamily project, you bring in both at the same time, and the review body, if the highest review body is City Council, then they would make the ultimate decision on both. I do think in that chapter we need to clean up that if it does go to City Council, whether or not there's a recommendation by Planning Commission. I noticed that it, under 050B on page 112-3, it's the last paragraph, and it goes into the next page. We just have to specify what the function of the Planning Commission is for a recommendation. Next is project evaluation and staff reports, and that just brings to light that staff will draft a report.
So can we go back on it? So you're
Sure.
going to add in there that it will come to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council on the conditional use permit.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it would go to you also for the zoning.
Right.
Project evaluation and staff reports just codifies the process of a staff report being written and distributed prior to Planning Commission review. Environmental review is outlined for CEQA review and the different categories that it could fall under. And a finding for compliance with CEQA and if necessary, additional reports. Next is application deemed withdrawn. It specifies when an application would be deemed withdrawn, and that if there's no action, I think it's for up to after 9 months, that we can actually close the application, which is something our existing code does not have and would be a great help to staff in closing applications. So, with that, any comments?
Well, this is kind of where I see the interactive part come in, and maybe a simple flow chart of the permit application review, administrative permits, and then how you go through that process. But in my vision on the computer would be that if you clicked on permit application review, you could go through these things, and then the next one would be administrative permits, and then you could go through those sections, and you, let's just say if you clicked onto permit application review, and then you want to go to CEQA, you could see what those, they could break out differently, so people could see a real linear, and maybe because I'm simple-minded, I need that type of process, and this is really nice in the document, but I'm trying to think the interactive part, and maybe just a simple flow chart in the front of this that shows those steps.
I agree.
And maybe we don't call it flow chart anymore, there's probably a new term for it, but, thanks.
Any other comments on this chapter?
Well done.
Yeah, it's a lot easier.
Okay, next is administrative permits. A couple examples of administrative permits are your home occupation permit, fence permits. I listed
Other home occupation.
other home occupation permits. In other places. Seasonal sales, temporary outdoor display, and off-site construction yards are a few. So these are in our land use table and then also in our supplemental regulations that we just went through, examples of when an administrative permit takes place or is utilized. The review authority of an administrative permit is the Community Development Director. There is no public notice or hearing for an administrative review. The appeal, if a administrative permit was appealed, it would be appealed to the Planning Commission. So, any comments on this chapter or any sections that you'd like to review? No.
Just as commentary, one thing that this does is right now we technically have several of these administrative permits, but they're all listed differently in the code with different standards, and that'll all be kind of one process, so it should simplify things a bit.
So next is design permits. So within a design permit, the purpose statement, and then we talk about the types of different design permits. So within the design permits, there's two different types. There's a minor design permit, which is approved by the Community Development Director, and then a regular design permit, which goes to Planning Commission. I'm going to break down the table for you so you can understand when each type of permit goes. For single-family residential, the permits that would go as a minor design permit approved by the Community Development Director would be ground floor additions that are under 15 feet in height. These could be visible from the right-of-way. So that's one change that took place in the new code. Also, accessory structures that are greater than 80 square feet or 8 feet in height. And just a reminder that we now allow electricity to go to those.
So can I ask a question there?
Yes.
Do we have a maximum on the accessory structure? What if somebody wants to put in a 500 square foot accessory structure?
We
I mean, we have a minimum. If it's over 80 square feet, it needs a permit, but do we have any limits on how big an accessory structure can be? If it's going to be if it needs to come to the Planning Commission if it's over 200 square feet? I mean,
I just want to check the definition quickly, but otherwise I don't think we do, and we also don't have a limit to how many accessories. Or did we add, is there two?
I thought that the second one had to get a permit from the Planning Commission.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, it just says an accessory structure is a structure that is incidental and subordinate to the primary and located on the same parcel, so I don't think there is a maximum anywhere in the code.
The way it's written right now is an accessory structure of any size would be minor design permit. That's how it's written.
So I think there should be some limit, because if somebody wants to put like a 300-foot structure in their backyard, I don't think that that's just an administrative permit.
Would you like us to make a threshold, and then if it goes beyond that, it would go to Planning Commission?
Right.
Okay. And what do you think that threshold should be?
Well, Don't we have a limit on the size of ground floor additions somewhere?
We took out the limit on ground floor additions, saying that as long as it meets the floor area ratio and it's less than 15 feet in height, it just has to comply with the floor area ratio and setback standard.
Okay, so you have a criteria there. How about 200 square feet?
Yeah, I don't have an issue.
I mean,
with
I'm
it.
just picking a number.
It's a 10 by 20. That seems reasonable.
I could do 300 square feet.
100 square feet? 300? Okay.
So we're saying 300 square feet and
If it-
greater
if-
comes to,
Yes.
Where's the design permit?
rather than a minor.
Becomes a design permit if it's more than 300 square feet. And then there's a whole process set up for it.
Because when would it become like an ADU?
Has a
Well,
kitchen.
when it has a kitchen in it, this, we've said you can only have electricity in it, but you're technically not supposed to have plumbing in it.
If they're going to put on an extra bathroom, they've got to come
That's right.
Right.
for the design permit for
Should
kitchen.
allow some.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll add a new threshold that's limited up to 300 square feet. Beyond that, it has to get a design permit. So, on design permits within single-family upper floor decks on a side or rear of the home, and it's as long as they're not adjacent. The only exception that was left for upper floor decks was if it's adjacent to open space. So, any upper floor deck on the side or rear of the home that is not adjacent to open space would have to come before Planning Commission. Upper floor additions, all upper floor additions would come to Planning Commission, and all
So
new
this will be
single-family homes.
reworded, right? About the upper floor decks?
Yeah, or 17-16-030B8 will list only if it's adjacent to open space, so we can reword it here.
Yeah, it
Just be
seems like
clear.
it should be reworded so it's clearer on this chart.
Any
No.
questions of that? Or comments? Next, we'll go into multifamily residential. Within multifamily residential, a minor design permit that goes to the community development director is any ground floor addition less than 3,000 square feet. I think we, in that, have to be more specific if it's 3,000 square feet throughout the whole property or per unit. That was one thing that came to mind putting together the slides. And then also a minor design permit is the accessory structures including garbage and recycling enclosures. So we put the 3,000 square feet in the code as a new threshold. I think that's something we'll probably want to discuss tonight. Is there a certain limit to how many square feet you'd like to be added on per unit or per a development? Typically, a multifamily development will have gone through a PD process. So oftentimes you'll have to come in and modify your PD, but
Well, this, the way this is worded is per structure.
is it per structure?
So you, I mean, you could have
Okay.
a multifamily project that has 10 different structures, and they could add 3,000 to each, or one
Okay.
might be just one big structure, and then they can only add 3,000, the way this is worded.
3,000 is pretty big for.
How did you come up with the 3,000? Just a common,
Seemed like a Goldilocks number, not too low.
well, I'm just curious, because if you think about, in a lot of projects, it wouldn't matter, but then some of the ones we're having concerns with right now, in that 40th Avenue area, if that 3,000 square feet was along the frontage area, there may be some concern of, so, yeah, I was just curious how we,
Yeah, I think since it's per structure, it should be lower. I think it should be like 1,000 square feet per structure, and then, as Commissioner Newman said, if they have, you're looking at, Capitola Knolls up there, they probably have 30 structures up there. They could actually add 30,000 square feet if they added 1,000 to each one.
You could do a percent instead of a square footage.
Yeah, I like percents.
And it may be more fair to do it per unit, because if you have a structure that has 8 units in it versus a structure that maybe has 3, I think the ones in the Jewel Box area have 2 or 3, I think there's 3 in each of those, that PD.
And those are 4.
Is
Four,
that
those
4?
are all 4.
Okay, so, but in that difference, if you have 1,000 square feet, it makes a big difference about how much square footage each unit could get. So maybe if you did it per unit, then if somebody comes in for their individual unit to expand it, it's easier to calculate as well. If there's not competition amongst neighbors,
200 square feet per unit.
administrative, and beyond that, it goes to planning commission.
Like percentage like you, I think I'm kind of leaning towards a percentage also. It seems that it allows for the size of the existing structure where you're at.
Yeah, thinking about it some more, percentage, I think, would make a lot of sense. But the whole idea is that, if it's a relatively big change to the
Right,
site,
exactly.
then it should come to the planning commission, and that's best expressed as a percentage rather than an absolute number.
Percent as a threshold.
15?
15% per unit or per structure?
15% per unit.
Well, it's the same. I mean,
In the end, it's the same, but they can come in incrementally, and there's no competition.
but yeah,
Yeah.
you get rid of all those kinds of
Yeah. Okay, moving on to when a design permit is required. A design permit is for upper floor decks and balconies not adjacent to open space. Ground floor additions that are more than 15% per unit. Upper floor additions, and new multifamily structures. Any comments?
One that strikes me is I wonder if we want to regulate upper floor decks and multifamily the same way we do with single-family residences, when generally they're looking at themselves, and that's their only area of usable outdoor space, private outdoor space.
I think they still should come to us, and then they would more than likely get approved. But there are a lot of multifamily structures that are adjacent to single-family homes as well, the way Capitol is set up, so,
even the decks and balconies are such a hot, like,
Yeah.
so many times here.
sorry, Rich.
Just a suggestion. I don't take any of it personally.
Okay, so this is design permits for non-residential projects. This includes mixed use. So basically your commercial projects and your mixed-use projects. A minor design permit is required for exterior modifications with no increase to the floor area. Also for accessory structures greater than 80 square feet or 8 feet high. And additions that are less than 3,000 square feet to an existing structure that are not visible from the street. So this one,
That could go to 15% again.
15%, okay.
Do you still want to set a maximum on accessory structures?
And I think we still want to have in our definition somewhere for accessory structures, or that we just need to make certain it's the same. Anything over 300 square feet needs to come in for a.
So the 15% on this one, if you had a really large commercial building such as the mall or something, is there a limit? Do you want to put up to 10,000 square feet or
Well,
up
it
to
says,
5,000?
it says existing non-residential structure where the addition is not visible from the primary street frontage.
Okay. So the 15% you're comfortable with?
Right.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on to when a design permit is required by Planning Commission, additions that are visible to the primary street frontage, from the primary street frontage, additions greater than 15%, and new non-residential structures. So, any comments? And the language within the table is clear. Through the old process, it was kind of questionable when you did and did not need a design permit. I think Ben did a great job of cleaning that up within this table. So, okay, so we'll move on to application submittal and review. Any comments on that section of code?
On exemptions.
Talk about exemptions.
Oh, the exemptions have to do with the wireless, so I left that out of the discussion this evening.
Right.
Right? Oh, I'm sorry. We should talk about single-family exemptions. I
Yeah.
passed over that altogether.
Because this one still has the 400 square feet at the rear of the house.
Is exempt.
So it wouldn't need a community
Design.
development director design permit. Would be
That's the
allowed
current
as a
standard.
building permit.
I think the new ones are the closure of the existing recessed entrance, the open porch, bay windows. I think those are the new changes, right?
Yeah, and then the single accessory structure, we'd remove the electricity from. So just water and sewer. Any
At number
discussion?
5, were we going to change that accessory structure as well on?
That's what doesn't need any kind of permit. You can just put under 80 square feet in.
Oh, under, I see, that's right, yeah.
You know, one thing that I do see occasionally is minor changes to the front of a house where candidly, I'm kind of loath to require any type of permit. Like, for instance, we recently had one for an awning. And I think strict interpretation of the code would have required me to get a design permit. And to me, it was just really hard to swallow to make them go through that process. So that's the type of thing I think with number 6, but I sort of want to make sure that I'm on the same page with the Planning Commission when I make those judgment calls.
As long as you're in your spot, we're good.
And it might be something we want to spell out more, but it's hard to capture the universe of minor changes.
Okay, now we'll move on to application submittal and review. So something that's new is the required streetscape. That's something that we've suggested in the past, and it's been a maybe. Now it'll be required within all buildings within 100 feet. So that will help with the context.
It does, yeah.
And then there's also the standards for enhanced visualization, which are maybe required during the review.
So you're changing shall to may?
Because this says the, applicant shall submit
Oh.
enhanced.
When any of, sorry. I misread that earlier then, so I thought this was optional. So it is a shall if one of the following apply, so.
If it's going to be a shall, I think that it needs to be, you need to have something in there that says that the exterior is going to be substantially changed. Because we did a major remodel, but the exterior looked the same. There wasn't any point to, spend the money to get a 3D kind of enhanced visualization of what it was going to look like. But I'm comfortable if you change the shall to a may, and whichever turns out to be easiest for you to administer.
I think we need to add a little more to this as
Yeah,
well, to say exactly what is enhanced visualization and when it's applied. So, or
Yeah, if you're not going to have shall there, then the clarification may makes it a little more vague.
Yeah, it seems like
May be
staff may
required.
require it if there are certain circumstances.
I think in the existing code, it was something to that effect of the planning commission may also require, so we can just make that a may also require, and then also specify what is that product of enhanced visualization, so.
So you're changing the shall to a may?
Yeah, a may also require. A better explanation of what project visualization materials are. Okay. Next is the Design Review Committee, which we just discussed. We're clear on. Public notice and hearing. Within a design permit that goes to Planning Commission, there's public notice and a public hearing. Within a minor design permit, it's the Community Development Director decision. There is public notice. There's a mailing that goes out to all property owners within 300 feet. And then a meeting is held upon request of any of those residents. So, I shouldn't say property owners.
This is a new type of notice, a notice of pending action.
Okay.
And the notice will clearly state that no public hearing will be held unless.
Yep, unless requested.
I can't remember now. We had an issue this last year that people didn't get notice for something.
It was the conceptual review thing that you may be thinking.
Another Garnet appeal.
There was also an issue that that the administrative noticing went out, and then we realized after the fact that it actually did need a full design permit to go before Planning Commission, and we clarified that with the neighbors, but they were the appellants in the end. So that was a staff error on my part.
No, this one wasn't a staff error. It's something we were, and I know Rich and I talked about this, that it didn't require a noticing to go out, but we all felt that it was important that
I think it was
everybody.
a conceptual.
Conceptual.
Was it the conceptual review? Yeah. That's probably a good one. Yeah, it's,
That change has been incorporated to another chapter.
Which we haven't seen yet.
That's right. It's not even in here yet. Ben drafted it last
Which we
week.
were dreaming of.
We know it's coming.
thanks for
Coming
keeping me
along
on
very
track.
nicely.
Okay.
Okay, next is the design permit findings. The design review criteria, which I didn't put into a slide because there are so many, but I think we talk about community character, neighborhood compatibility, historic character. Are there any edits? Some of these will apply to projects and some won't.
Excuse me.
This is where mechanical equipment, trash receptacles, and utilities is also addressed, which comes up often. Okay. Next is the findings for approval. Within the list of findings of approval, there's, when we went through signs, Commissioner Ortiz brought up several times that we need to be looking at character and scale and development patterns. So in going through this, I added one that says maintains the character, scale, and development pattern of the neighborhood. This is a finding that we utilized today. I switched out a little bit of the wording and put in development pattern rather than the current, but I thought we should touch upon that as a finding where it's under our current design. Any comments there? Okay, next is conditions of approval, and that's just saying that we can tie conditions of approval to a design permit. And next is the appeal and post-decision procedures, which it's a planning commission decision, so those can be appealed to city council. When it's a community development director decision, it can be appealed to the planning commission. Okay, we'll jump into use permits. Within use permits, the purpose statement is clear. When a use permit is required. Talks about conditional use permits or a minor use permit, and they're outlined within each zoning chapter. The review authority for each. So the Planning Commission takes action on conditional use permits and master use permit applications. the community development director takes action on minor use permits and tenant use permit applications when a tenant changeout occurs. The application submittal and review. And it just talks about submitting an application and paying fees. The public noticing and hearing procedures. And that just relates to the other chapter for public noticing requirements. Within considerations, there are new considerations listed for a conditional use permit, which these are important. This is what you'll see reviewed within your staff report. So operating characteristics such as hours of operation, traffic generation, light, noise, odor, and dust, etc. Adequate public services and infrastructure, the potential impacts to the natural environment, and also physical suitability of the subject site for the proposed use in terms of design, location, operating characteristics, shape, size, topography. So that's where you look at your circulation and possible impacts. Any comments there? The findings are listed. There's 5 findings. Pretty standard. Any comments?
Has this changed from the original plan? Is this the same basic wording?
They're minor.
Is the tenant use permit new?
The tenant use permit,
We get to that.
there's,
We're coming
within
up.
a master use permit, whenever a new tenant.
That's a new concept, though, isn't it? That wasn't in our.
Capitol, yeah, it's not a
Right.
code.
Yeah, only under a master use permit we could approve them administratively because, yeah.
Oh, look. It's one we don't use. There is a tenant use permit listed in the current code.
Under the master use.
There's a tenant use permit separate from the master use permit now, right?
So I got the current code up there, so there, it does have standards for a master conditional use permit and tenant use permits, but I don't think they're exercised a lot. I don't know if we've done any in the last couple of years. I don't know if historically they've been used.
So the use is, a tenant use permit within the new code is issued by the community development director for individual tenants that comply with the master use permit. So we went over the conditions of approval. So appeals and proposed decision procedures. Any comments about that? Planning commission determinations can be appealed to the city council, community development to the planning commission. Then there's section on the master use and tenant use permit, which I believe mirrors the existing.
Yeah, we made an attempt to actually make the existing language comprehensible. A lot of confusion about what the existing rules are. This is an effort to kind of clean it up.
I know it's a little awkward, but I just moved here and I don't know how the parking thing works outside. Can somebody please invite me?
Where,
I'm running around doing something important, but I got a ticket. Am I good after 8 or do I have to leave by 8? How does that work?
You're good after 8.
Thank you very much. You guys have a nice day.
Finally, some public input.
Just that it's not after 8, so.
Very good. Come on up to the mic. Sign in.
Yeah.
He was very
That was going
polite.
to challenge us too, because I think I know how to use it.
So you're done. Sign in.
Could you give us your name and so are we good? We're up to variances now?
Yeah, I'm ready for variances.
Okay, ready to move on to variances. So, variances. So these, I didn't have many comments about revisions, so I'm just going to we'll just go section by section. And so the first section is the purpose statement, and it's typical for variance. When they are allowed, and they're for deviations from a physical development standard that applies to a subject property. Then it's specific of when they're not allowed, and for a use that's not permitted in the zone, to reduce a minimum lot size for single-family dwelling or a minimum site area per dwelling use requirements, to reduce the environmentally sensitive habitat area, or to allow deviations from the requirements of the general plan. The review authority is the Planning Commission. The application submittal and review, just typical, and then the public notice and hearing refers to the public notice and hearing chapter. Findings for approval.
Isn't that governed by state law?
And it's the same as state law.
The findings?
The findings, yeah. Conditions of approval just states that the Planning Commission may add conditions of approval to achieve consistency with the general plan and the LCP and zoning. Precedent states that the approval of a variance shall not set the precedent for the granting of any future variance. Each application shall be considered on its own merits. And then the appeal and post-decision procedures, it goes to City Council. Next. We could go to page 132-1 and look at sign permits. I'm sorry, I have the, actually, Rich, if you could pull it up on your, we'll pull it up on the screen.
We spent 3 hours talking about signs the other night. We have more now.
Yeah, but this just is how you can implement what you guys talked about the other night.
So this establishes the purpose of the sign permits, to ensure consistency with the general plan and not create negative impacts to adjacent properties. Goes over the types of sign permits. There are two types of sign permits. There are those sign permits that are reviewed by the Planning Commission, and also administrative sign permits that are reviewed by the Community Development Director. When they're required, it depends on the type of sign within the sign chapter. The review authority is the Planning Commission on all sign permits and the Community Development Director on all administrative sign permits. And the next section is the application submittal and review, which relates back to the submittal specific to signs. Public notice and hearing for the Planning Commission. You have to follow the public noticing procedures in the following chapter. There's no public noticing for administrative sign permits, so that's more of an over-the-counter permit that's issued. Findings for approval. There's.
I have a comment on that one.
Sure.
So, I think E is a little strange. If the property is located within or near a residential area, the proposed signs are harmonious with the character of the residential neighborhood. I mean, it just seems like gobbledygook to me.
Yeah.
I mean, how would you say that a sign is harmonious with Riverview Terrace, or a sign is harmonious with, I'm sorry, I think that one maybe ought to go away.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a situation that we can control a sign near a residential area. I think it's lighting.
Yeah, you know, I don't know, what
I
came
think
to mind
something
was
else.
the Depot Inn or the Depot Hill that should maybe have a character of what a depot was. I don't know, that was a reach, but,
Train on it.
yeah, exactly.
We can scratch that.
Or maybe make it more specific for, well, we have certain criteria within each mixed-use neighborhood, mixed-use village. We're going to have all of that anyway for
Right.
signs, so I think it's easy to scratch.
Yeah, I just don't see how, I mean, if we're going to have a requirement, that lights from signs won't impact residential neighborhoods, then that's clear to me what that means, but this one,
It was a feel-good statement is kind of how I read it. It's like, I'm okay with taking it out.
but I mean, you can have someone from a neighborhood come and say, well, that sign's not characteristic of our neighborhood, and how would you defend it, or
That would be tough. It's really, really subjective.
Okay, next is the conditions of approval, that the review authority has the right to attach conditions of approval. And then again, post-decision procedures, planning commission can be appealed to city council, community development director can be appealed to the planning commission. Any other comments? Okay, next we'll go into minor modifications. And the purpose statement for minor modifications. And this is to allow small deviations from development standards to accommodate projects which meet the needs of the property owner, are consistent with the zoning code and general plan, and do not negatively impact the neighboring properties at or the community at large.
This is an entirely new type of permit.
Yes, yeah.
And I would add, this was something we didn't talk about, issues and options, but it sort of came to light to me when we were going through a couple of recent variance applications where they had favorable outcomes, but the findings were probably a little thin. And so I thought this was something at least worthy of discussion, so that when we get these situations where they can't quite meet the standard and we want to give them some flexibility, we're not making weak variance findings to get there.
So, I mean, I haven't really thought about this a lot, but so it doesn't make the fence height now 6'6" automatically?
It could, yeah.
And I mean, aren't we really just sort of adjusting every standard we have now by 10%?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good comment in that we might want to tighten what types of structures they apply to. The thought was, at least on those, we had parking dimensions where, they were a foot or two different, not a big deal. I think there was one where a garage was a couple feet in the setback. This would be a method to allow them without a higher variance finding.
I don't think height of anything should,
yeah, I don't think height, I agree, I don't think height should be in there. I don't think minimum and maximum setbacks from property should be in there, because, that's sort of getting into conforming, non-conforming, all of that.
But then what you're saying is that as today, it would require a variance for the garage to be a little bit into the setback area, or...
Yeah, I think what we want to, I do see where you're going with it I thought we talked about particularly with parking, and particularly parking in neighborhoods where there were wide right-of-ways that weren't being used. We wanted to come up with a system to allow those to happen.
Right, but that's what the maximum and minimum setbacks from property lines
But
is all
that
about.
could get into buildings. Rear setbacks, front setbacks, side setbacks.
yeah, I don't think we
that's
should
way too generous.
change the rules by 10% for every setback now.
Yeah. I think we want to be specific about garages and parking, not all setbacks.
Just as the contrarian here, I think there might be some situation like when we dealt with the Garnet appeal, where it was square lot, it was flat, variance findings were a little challenging to make, and we did so by looking at the development pattern where you have older homes that probably had different standards and they were built at different setbacks from the front yard.
Yeah, I can deal with different setbacks if we're talking about garages and parking. I just want to refine it a little more.
But isn't Garnet the one that got appealed?
It is.
So, I mean, it sort of almost unproves your point, because here you got it was something that the neighbors were very concerned about, and you don't want to really have the flexibility in the staff to change the rule when they want to protest it and appeal it.
Well, this isn't giving staff, it's not like a minor design permit, it's a minor modification that the planning commission can use when reviewing design permits, right?
But I don't think we want to do it for heights or setbacks for whole buildings and stuff. I think we have to get a little more specific about what areas do we see as problem areas.
Yeah, and that area, like, I agree, because like the Garnet situation really was in a area
See,
that said
I'm
no
okay with
sidewalk.
dimension
or- yeah.
standards for parking spaces,
Yeah.
driveways, parking lots, and loading areas.
4 and 5 are okay, maybe.
Right.
Well, and if those dimensionals, so instead of the garage being into the setback, you would approve it based on its dimension being different than
The
standard?
dimensions of the parking spaces, you wouldn't have to have,
Well, we didn't want the dimensions of the parking spaces to change. We wanted the garage to be closer to the property line than it was supposed to be.
I think we had a case in Riverview where they were slightly short of the driveway depth, and we let them kind of park over some landscaping. This would have been a case where you didn't need a variance for that.
They could provide 18 feet, but because there was a sidewalk, they were required to provide 20, so it was
Right.
just this, a lot.
Yeah, that was a river-
It was a variance in
So
the
if-
end, but it would have been easier to.
If
but
you
we have
took two and
switched the
just
standard.
added 4 garages and parking,
but we have that under
Requirements?
4.
nope, that 4 is dimensional standards, it doesn't have anything to do with setbacks. Unless you're including setbacks in your dimensional standards. When I hear dimensional standards, I'm thinking the measurement for the parking spaces or the measurement for
Well, you
the,
could put dimensional standards, setbacks for parking spaces,
Garages.
garages.
Open space landscaping.
So,
Didn't require it.
If you want to have some flexibility on landscaping, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, it's a question. I mean, keep in mind, 10%
Yeah.
isn't much. In fact, some of the
Yeah, I could
cases
do
I'm talking
3.
about, I don't think they would have qualified because
Yeah.
they were over 10%, but
I'm fine
And
with
if there
that.
was a specific issue with a setback from the property line, we could still go the variance route, right?
Yeah.
So we still have an out there.
yeah, but you're,
If we got rid of 1 and 2, and then we did change the wording on 4 to include the setbacks for parking driveways and
I would put 1 and 2 under subsection A into subsection B, so we're clear that those are
Yeah,
excluded.
exactly.
okay, good.
Yeah, go the other direction.
Okay, and that is a planning commission
Yeah, sorry, I had that.
decision, so. The application submittal review is, again, typical of every other requirement. Public noticing is that the planning commission shall review and act on minor modifications. The public hearing that is noticed. The findings are specific.
Since this is an end run around the variance requirements, which are state law, I wonder if this has been looked at by anybody.
This is typical in zoning codes, and I'm not aware of any
Challenge to
successful
it.
challenge of it.
So on F, on the findings of approval, do we want to say that it will not establish an undesirable precedent? Or do we want to just say that it won't establish a precedent?
I think precedent is the,
More consistent with the other one. that
Yeah.
we had that.
because you wouldn't want to approve anything that was undesirable.
Implied.
We have,
yikes.
I just like it being consistent.
Okay, conditions of approval, are there any more comments on the findings for approval? Okay, we'll move on to conditions of approval, that you can add conditions of approval. And the appeal for this would go to the city council. The post-decision, you followed.
And here's reasonable accommodations for you.
Now my memory kicks in.
It's hard to keep it all straight. So I thought most of the reasonable accommodation was also state law.
88.
It is. I don't think there is many substantive changes in this chapter. It's kind of cut and pasted from the old code, and it's state law required. So I don't know that we have too much discretion to change things here.
Does it come up very often?
I haven't had a single case since I've been here.
I did one when I was here last time.
I think there's a lady on my street who had to put in a wheelchair ramp and took down a tree that maybe,
Yeah.
or for that, might not.
It'll come up inevitably, but
Yeah.
not often.
Usually it's a wheelchair ramp and a side yard setback.
This is like the whole front yard turned into a wheelchair ramp.
Yeah.
So the review authority is the community development director, shall take action on reasonable accommodations. If it's submitted concurrently with a permit, then it will be reviewed by the planning commission at the time of the review by the permit. And then the community development director has the right to bring it to the planning commission if it doesn't feel comfortable with making a decision. Public notice shall be publicly displayed at City Hall. And then the application requirements.
And just to be clear, that's the notice of the availability of this process, not that there's a notice to neighbors.
Yeah, yeah.
Most everywhere, it's a 30-day kind of turnaround. Is 45 days because it takes longer, or?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to it. My best guess is that that's the wording from state law, but I think we would act much sooner than 45 days, at least if it was a valid request.
Yeah, I think it is 45 in state.
For stupid requests, we just don't have the same.
Oh, if someone's making something up, yeah, it might take a little longer.
I don't know, I've seen it happen twice in Capitola, and it seemed to happen really quickly.
Yeah.
It wasn't,
I mean, they're over the counter. We normally turn that stuff over in a matter of days.
Right.
The criteria for decision is listed as well. And then conditions of approval can be adopted. And the appeal process is outlined as well. So, the next, any comments? We'll move on. Zoning code amendments. So this is the process in which to go about a zoning code amendment. The initiation can be done by the city council, the planning commission, the community development director, or one or more owners of a property for which the amendment is sought. Text amendments also can be brought forth by the city council, planning commission, community development director, or any resident, property owner, or business owner in the city. The application is outlined, the application process. Within a zoning code amendment, it requires planning commission hearing and action. And
What kind of fee is associated with it for the public?
Exactly what I was trying to find on here.
I'm trying, I think it's a 1,500.
There's a lot of
There's gotta
time
be
and
a
effort
fee.
that goes into
I
it.
think it's a $5,000 deposit, if memory serves me right.
There is a fee tied to it, though, right? But
Yes.
we don't have, I didn't see where it said fees in here.
it's online, I know.
That would be under the,
Yeah, it's referenced in
in our.
section 030, where they have to submit the fees. We don't put that in the ordinance because
Right,
that changes
okay.
periodically.
So the planning commission makes a recommendation
Right.
to the city council.
So it has to be a majority vote of the total membership. So even if there's only 3 commissioners hearing it, that would mean all 3 would have to vote for it. And the same is true for the council, and I think, again, that's in state law.
So if we have too many people recused, we do those straws.
Yes.
Right. But if you have only 3 sitting up here, all 3 would have to vote for it.
Yeah, this is one chapter within the zoning code that is sort of prescribed by state law.
So then there's city council hearing and action and a requirement to report. If there's any major modification to what the planning commission decision was, the city council has to, we'd report back to the planning commission. If the planning commission, if there's a failure, then it's recommended approval after 40 days if there's failure to review. And then there's specific findings for approval. That's that
So is 40 days enough time? I mean, if we hear it goes to council, let's say it goes to council the first meeting of the month is,
I think those dates are set in state law, you have to keep them.
And I think we could meet them in most cases.
or we could have a special meeting. So. Okay, Chapter 17, 148 is public notice and hearings. This, I'd like to preface by saying I'm hoping to put together more of an additional table to outline exactly for each type of permit what the noticing requirement is, just so it's a little more easy to administer. These questions come up all the time of how many days, how long is the appeal period, how many days, who does it have to be noticed to, and by having that in a table format, it'll make it much easier for staff. So we'll be adding an additional table to this. But this goes through what the context of what has to be within each notice.
So can we get the city attorney's opinion about the whole newspaper thing? I mean, you have no newspaper of general circulation unless,
I've talked to them about it in the past, and they've said using the Sentinel is fine.
I was just trying to get out of having to do a lot of notices in there because
Yeah.
They're expensive.
they're very expensive,
They are.
and at this point in time.
Nobody reads them.
Right.
Unless we have to, I know the Coastal Commission requires us to do some, but
where else would you
I
put
would
it?
I would like to eliminate them as much as possible.
Oh, it's much cheaper to put the notices in there. It's a little legal paper that,
Right.
it's just, it qualifies, but nobody reads it either.
Yeah, Santa Cruz County Recorder or something like that, yeah.
Much
yeah,
cheaper.
Yeah.
But I agree, this is a kind of an antiquated concept for in today's world. Much better to say you have to put it on the internet, on the city's website.
I'll ask the question. I don't know if we'll get much there. It's something the legislature probably needs to take up, but I agree.
The notice.
Yeah, I think the city spends thousands of dollars every year putting these notices in the newspaper. And I can't remember the last time I paid attention to one of them, and I read the newspaper.
Is there any portion of the noticing section that you'd like to go over? There. It's pretty
Yeah,
standard.
my thing would be to have it as simple and as streamlined as we can have it and still conform to the law.
I think one of the things we are going to try to do is standardize a lot of the noticing procedures, even if it means some permit types have increased noticing procedures so that it's very easy to remember and administer.
Why isn't the mailing to neighbors being replaced by electronic notification in these things?
That's state law,
State
too.
The state law still requires, I think it's,
Yeah.
They outline for variances and conditional use permits, certain types of permits, exactly how they need to be noticed.
and then in Capitola, you get into the coastal zone, and they have requirements.
And mailings go out to everybody within 300 feet. And the planning commission is tied to 500 feet or 300 feet.
500.
So is there any way,
I mean, the disqualification rule?
yeah, I mean, not in the zoning code, but is there any way that you guys could mail something to the planning commissioners that are within 500 feet of the project?
You have your map.
Yeah, but you have to pull out the agenda and look on your map every time something gets close enough?
I mean, I think that's a procedural thing we could look at, yeah,
Should be helpful.
With the agenda.
yeah.
We could look at it, doing something with the agenda and just doing a GIS.
Seems pretty easy.
I know I've missed one, so I'm rather sensitive to the item. And you're going to add the conceptual reviews to the noticing part.
Yes.
Now we have a Facebook page. Is there any plan to do anything on Facebook?
So we have had some discussion with the city council regarding sort of our public-facing, the ways that we try to disseminate information to the public and various ways to do that. And we're talking about different ways to do that. That could be a component of it. I think our website, some improvements on there are certainly going to be a piece of it. We do have a Twitter and a Nixle, and we have some presence on Nextdoor. So there's a lot of these different platforms that seem to evolve constantly, but it's something that we are looking at right now.
Yeah, it seems to me that, like, next door is nice because it's geographically sensitive, but what happens if you miss one and you just don't put that, I mean, does that set you up for some type of situation where you're liable because you didn't do the noticing properly, or we have to?
Well, I think the noticing's still going to continue to be by state law, so you're
No,
stuck
but I'm
with
saying
it.
if we start using stuff like Nextdoor, I think it's great to use that because you could have it by Depot Hill, Riverview, whatever area, but then
No,
if
I-
you miss one, do you?
My expectation would be at the end of it that, we probably use the city website as the depository for all information and send out like quick hitting links to, this is what's going on, go to the website, this link to read more.
Really be nice if the state law would allow for the city website to be the newspaper of circulation, because then you could have a section on the website that said
Yeah.
notices, public notices. It would be so much better for everyone.
Particularly since there is no newspaper.
So are you
in
going to Sacramento
circulation.
soon?
I'm not, but I can talk to city managers if you can reach out to our contact with the League of Cities and see if it's something that they would take up. I'm sure that it would be widely accepted. I think all governments up
This
and down
makes
the
more
state.
sense. It's
Yeah.
cheaper. Well, no, the newspaper lobby would not like it.
No, that's true, yeah. Yeah,
Pretty entrenched.
they need all the revenue they can get these days.
Write the editorials about the people, I mean, they,
Yeah.
You would have to add, in reasonable accommodations, you'd have to add an area for those people who don't have computers or
Yeah,
internet.
that's
people.
true.
Wow, you're flying right through this tonight, Katie.
We sure are. So then we go through decision and noticing. At the end here. The timing, so after a decision's made.
I had a question. For the minor design permit, if somebody requests a hearing, does that hearing then come before the planning commission, or do you set up a public hearing with the community development director? Was it?
Community Development Director. And then that can be appealed to the Planning Commission.
Okay.
And then we always send out a final action notice after the appeal period so that the applicant has a list of the conditions and exactly what the motion was during the hearing. And we can get into appeals. Next section, 17152. And this allows the public to appeal a decision made by the Community Development Director or Planning Commission.
how was the issue of the city council appealing the planning commission decision handled?
We, I'm gonna,
Remember, that was one of our
Yeah.
issues?
Yeah, so where we landed on it was the appeal process is actually a separate chapter of our municipal code. And I think there's several revisions that need to be made to that chapter. The idea is that we're going to ask the city attorney, when they have some time, to work on an update to that entire chapter.
As you recall, there was a Supreme Court case, I believe, last couple of years where a city councilman somewhere in Southern California appealed a decision and then sat on the hearing and voted. And the court said you can't do that. If you appeal it, you have to abstain from voting on it. So there is an issue with the way it's currently set up in the code that a council person could appeal your
That was a
decision.
stupid decision, because it assumed that city council people don't have preconceived ideas on issues, and they campaign on their
Yeah.
issues.
So we kind of got away from the call-ups and everything else and put that on the back burner to address in the future. But I think for the meantime, if a council person wanted to appeal, they could, but they couldn't participate in the
We
vote.
put it on back burner, and we just left it the way it is.
Maybe we could add a note in here under appeals that we may review your property on issues. I said,
So I have a question. Since you're going to be redoing that, and we now have a new sort of system with administrative permits, can a planning commissioner appeal an administrative permit to the planning commission?
I think you could as a resident. Now, my guess is that you wouldn't be able to vote on the matter, but I don't know that
I
for
would
certain.
think you wouldn't be able to vote. I mean, I think it would be like the,
Right.
Good for the goose is good for the gander.
yeah.
and I'm sorry again, you pointed out to me last time, Ben, but if you appeal, you have to pay a fee?
Yes.
$142 appeal fee.
It's under the permit process or the,
Well, fees are on a separate schedule.
no, I know, but it was
updated on-
under the wording last time under, it applies to the, there will be a fees applied to it.
Well, it says with all required application fees, form of appeal number one.
There you go, that's what I was looking for.
So it's really just a $142 issue, because anyone can get a proxy appeal for them.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it used to be that the council could appeal for free.
They still
And so
can.
someone would go to a council member and say, well, you appeal this for me.
Call a friend, yeah.
Call a friend, because I don't want to pay the $142 fee.
Right.
Any other comments on the appeal section?
Rich?
No.
Oh,
We can jump into post-decision procedures. So post-decision procedures, something that's new is that within subsection A of effective date of decision, there's a new explanation on what happens when, after a city council decision, if it's in the coastal appeal zone. And how before that was not addressed, I think it was only in the coastal zone in which we addressed it. Conformance of approved plans, that all work performed under an approved permit shall be in compliance with the approved drawings and plans and any conditions of approval. Changes are, when they're submitted and processed in compliance with section 15670, which is a new section we'll talk about. But performance guarantees is a new section that comes first.
I think I just had a question about the amount of security, that it had some type of wording that tied it to like a value of the project, or, I mean, we could leave it up to the community development.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good suggestion. I think the standard is we want, if it's going to be a bond or something, it covers 100% of the work, should the city have to do it
Right.
themselves, so,
Usually
or
not
more.
150%.
Yeah, at least 100, oftentimes 150, so,
I'd go with 150.
yeah, we can add that. I think that's the public works standard
Yeah.
they've used.
So that would go under C.
I think that's a good addition.
I think too.
So section 70 is changes to an approved project, and this was to help with the ongoing issue we're having of changes being made in the field and how we ensure that they come back to the planning commission if it's a significant change. So the applicant can put a change in writing and shall support support in bringing the evidence of what they're asking for. Public notice would be required if the requested change requires going back to the Planning Commission, unless it falls under a minor change, which is listed under C. So I'll give you a minute to look over those minor changes and let me know if you'd like to change anything.
So I had a question with number 5. Number 5 is saying that if it was a feature that we talked about during the original thing, then they can bring it back and it's a minor review.
The requested changes do not involve a feature?
It's
of
the
project?
opposite. So if you reviewed a project and you said that window is really important for it to be over there, and then they want to move that window back when they actually construct it, you
Okay.
say, no, it has to go back to the Planning Commission.
Yeah, if there is feedback on this section, it'd be helpful for me, even in the interim, because I often see these cases and struggle a little bit with some of the changes, the size of a window or modifies a porch or something, and I struggle with trying to figure out what the Planning Commission would want to do with it.
Well, I went through this, and it became a little bit of a hassle, but to me, it wasn't a big change. I had a slider and a window, I just changed the walls, and it became it's just same slider size, same window size, and just on opposite walls in the backyard that didn't affect anybody, but ended up having to go through quite a process. So it really is a minor, it depends what is really minor. I mean, I read some of your examples here, but
Yeah, I mean, I don't see, we're going to avoid having it just really end up being sort of discretionary with your practice, and we have to rely somewhat on the staff to handle this and make good decisions about what requires review and what doesn't.
Right. And I think, we get that notice about projects that, some have been approved, some are, you tell us what you've done. I think that's a good tool, because if there's something in there that sort of stands out, we can all agree we will individually sort of let you know. So if you're starting to do something that's worrisome, we can tell you.
There isn't really any process here for, I mean, basically it's going to be like if you do one and it happens, once it happens, they got the permit, right? So then we say, well, you shouldn't have done, that kind of changes for the future.
Right. Yeah, it's just
well, I know one that's
talking to you, communicating.
I know, like F, landscaping, if consistent with the landscaping seems to be one that, by the time you get done building
Right.
your new home, it's like, that really doesn't fit what.
You don't want a maple tree, you've decided it should be an oak.
Right, yeah.
I was
like
thinking
it.
about the house up on, wasn't Fanmar, but up on was it Cherryvale Terrace or whatever it was, that he changed so much, and the Planning Commission actually wanted him to take the siding off.
Yeah, he redid the,
Yeah, he had blocked off and made solid some stairwell walls that were supposed to have some character to them and that kind of stuff. I think this here, I think it covers it in number I.
Right.
Modifications that fundamentally alter the architectural style of a structure are not considered a minor change. That would, all of those little character defining things that we made and put back in would fall under that, and therefore would not be minor, right?
Right.
I think what's important here is that it's just a may. And so it's not as though someone can read this section and say, oh, I can do that.
Right.
Right,
right.
right, good point.
Another, under D, the 25% rule for materials and colors affecting less than 25%. That, in that example where the siding was changed to 100% of the building, that, right then and there, we would have said, it's got to go back to Planning Commission, and then we would have caught the architectural details and all of that, so.
Should colors be included in that? I mean, if the guy decides to paint his house yellow instead of blue, I mean,
just has to wait until after the The house is
But
final painted anyway, so-
I'm comfortable with
do it
staff
forever.
approving change colors. Somebody submitted a color board, they can't even get that color anymore, or they put it up and they hate it. I think they should be able to approve changes in color.
Yeah, I think changes in color should be not limited to 25%. You do the whole, because we don't really get involved in color anyway.
If someone's going to repaint their home, they do not come to us for a
No.
paint permit.
Right.
Yeah.
To just delete colors, or
I think we should delete colors.
Agreed.
I'm good with
We're all
that.
on board with that.
They want to paint it purple, we'll all live with it.
Unless it's chrome or something reflective.
I think the only place that you'd really want to regulate your color is Six Sisters. You know, if someone started painted their sister,
Right,
the
but this
historic-
says he may approve a change.
Yeah.
It's not that he's automatically going to approve a change.
Yeah, exactly.
But on colors, he can, I just want to remove the limits on colors. He can do whatever he wants to do on colors.
Fine with that.
Yep, good.
so time limits and extensions are outlined. Permit must be exercised within 2 years, or else it becomes void, unless they apply for an extension. Exercise is defined as a building permit is issued and construction has commenced, a certificate of occupancy is issued, or the land use has been established. Extension of time, the community development director may approve extensions as listed in 1 through 6 under C.
So number 3 says the review authority may approve up to 2 two-year extensions to a permit. So we're not saying the community development director can approve up to 2 and then it comes to us, or
We
Is it
read the
limiting us?
review, if it was a permit we issued,
Goes back to planning
then it
commission
has
for
to
the
come back
extension.
to us.
And that's new, right? This is new, right? Because I
This
think,
is something we talked about in issues and options, and we modified so that there's you can come back twice and ask for an extension twice. And I think currently the extension, I think it's tied to certain permits, and this makes it across different permits that you can ask for extensions.
I think we've had a couple that have been more than 2 years, or more than twice they've come for a 2-year extension.
We've had it on an annual basis, and there was an example of a single-family home that we were bringing back the permit every year.
Yeah.
And finally, they've been building, so
Yeah.
goodness.
In 3, the word map is missing after tentative.
And then the resubmittals. For a period of 12 months following a denial or revocation of a permit, the city shall not accept an application for the same or substantially similar permit for the same site unless the denial or revocation was made without prejudice. So that, I believe, is in the existing code.
Yeah, I sort of wonder about that one. I mean, I guess, someone comes in with they want to build a house, and the design gets denied by the planning commission for some reason. It's just not acceptable. And they're willing to go back and redesign it and come up with a new design. Do we really want to make them wait a year?
I think that it allows us to deny it without prejudice.
right.
Which is what would happen in that situation. You'd say, we really don't like that, and why don't you fix it, and denied without prejudice.
Okay. I'm happy with that.
We actually did that last year.
Or we give them a chance to appeal it, they take their choice.
And they'll get approved.
Okay, so next is permit revocation, and this section establishes a new standard permit revocation procedure that applies to all discretionary permits, replacing the revocation permits procedures of the previous zoning code. So within this, a permit may be revoked by the review authority that originally approved the permit. And where the community development director was the approved authority, the community development may choose to refer the revocation to the planning commission for review and final decision. There's a notification process that takes place. Public notice and hearing would go out. And then there are findings, 7 findings that would that are possible, but within the review authority may revoke a permit only if one or more of the findings can be made. And then the effect of the revocation is that the revocation of the permit shall have the effect of terminating the approval and denying the privileges granted by the permit. Any comments?
Appeals. Are decisions to revoke permits appealable? I think so.
Yeah, I
Say
think,
appeal
I
decisions,
think
or
all
just-
planning commission decisions need to be appealable to the city council. All administrative decisions need to be appealable to the planning commission.
So we'll add an appeal
Good catch.
process. So that concludes part 4 of the zoning code. The glossary I'd like to return to you because I really want to go through and make sure that we
Yeah, I was
do
going to
a
ask
fine
that too,
tune of
because I
that.
have a whole list at home of things like you can add.
So what's
share that?
Yeah.
Historic,
Could you email, if you have any terms that you haven't brought up during these meetings, could you please send me an email so that
Sure.
I can at least start there? But we do want to do a fine tune of that. Go ahead.
what else do we have left? We have the historic,
The conceptual design review,
Coastal,
coastal,
geologic hazards,
yeah.
and we are continuing to get comments from Coastal Commission on other chapters with meaningful, substantial policy changes, which I will continue to brief you on.
Their timeline is over, we're past that part.
And the
And they have another,
it's too late.
they did tell me last week, they said, these aren't our final comments. We have another layer of staff that needs to review these and give you more comments, so.
Do we really need to unfund
the decision on temporary dining is that they're going to rewrite it and then take both sections to council, and council's going to, we're not going to see the temporary dining discussion again.
Well,
at
we'll
our level,
see it
right?
when it comes back as a red line. I mean,
After it
we'll
goes to
see
council,
everything
though, right?
one more time before it goes to council in a red line document.
Yeah, we've been working on parts 1 and 2 red lines currently, so we'll have those to you very soon. And then we'll go into part 3. We'll start working on them once we get part 1 and 2 out, and we'll be back with those red lines in part 4.
So we have a number of dates here that you want to review about what's available. Can you tell us, what do you think we need to be doing on these days? I know it's on June 2nd, we have our regular planning commission meeting, and we're going to talk about historic stuff that night. Is that correct?
That was, we were discussing, originally that was the idea, was to bring forth the historic. We have, I want to say, 5 applications that will be heard that night.
So maybe a busy night.
So it may be that we're going to try to circulate your red lines to you soon, and we were debating whether or not to do historic that night. We wanted to see what the availability was first for you in June, to see if there are nights that all 5 commissioners are available, and then we would divide up what we'll be reviewing when,
Okay.
based on your
So
availability. 'cause
June
we know
2nd, we'll
that-
kind of set aside just for our regular meeting that night.
Right.
And then, so we have June 6th, June 13th, June 27th, and June 30th. Do we want to check availability?
Yeah, and Gail let me know that she is available, Commissioner Ortiz, on the 6th and the 13th, but otherwise is not available on the 27th and 30th.
I'm available all nights because I apparently don't have a life, so. But we're limited to, we're really looking at the 6th and the 13th right now, because we'd like to have all 5 there, right?
Yeah, the 6th was going to be problematic for me, but if that's the only time,
Is the 13th?
13th is fine.
I have it on my calendar for the 13th for some reason.
So the 13th? or
13th?
13th and 27th are both fine with me.
This is the calendar.
Oh, I have it on the 27th as well.
Does the 27th work for the rest of you? Because we can do red lines, and Gail could provide
I'm
separate
open the
comment.
27th.
27th.
Everything works for me except the 6th.
Okay, so we'll plan on meeting on the 2nd, and we'll see, we'll decide whether or not to give the historic to you for the June 2nd meeting or the June 13th, because it sounds like all 5 will be at those meetings, but,
And I think the historic's going to take some time.
okay.
We've got
And
5
coastal.
hearings on the 2nd, it's maybe not,
Yeah, I don't
Good
think
time to
we
do
should
that
try
one.
and do it on the 2nd. I think we should try and do it on the 13th,
I agree.
if all 5 people are here.
Great.
Good idea, because you don't want to do that when you're tired.
Yeah.
So we'll continue to the
To
13th.
the 13th?
Yeah.
Looking
I
for a
make a motion to continue to the 13th.
And the
Is that okay,
2nd?
Rich?
Second?
First and second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Very good. I have one more commissioner comment. June 6th and 7th, so I know some of you are available because you just told me you were. We're having
you trapped us in that.
Capitola Police Officer Appreciation Dinner at Paradise Beach Grill. Tickets are $40, and the money goes to the, back to the police officers through the Capitola Public Safety Foundation, so it includes dinner, dessert, wine, the whole bit, so you can see Rudy or one of the foundation members, or myself, if you want a ticket. And it's a good time. This is Police Officer Appreciation Week for those that haven't been
Oh,
appreciated.
it's
or
the
officers.
6th and the 7th?
Or the 7th. You can buy a ticket and go to dinner either night. The ticket's good for,
Well, the 6th, we have a meeting, right?
no,
No,
the
we're not
13th.
having a meeting.
Oh, we're
But
not,
we know you're available, so
yeah, I'm going.
So now you're stuck.
From you.
any other comments? Any staff comments?
Just along those same veins, it is a volunteer dinner next Wednesday night, so hope to see you there.
Tuesday night?
Tuesday.
24th, right?
Paradise Grill.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to miss it.
All right, well, thank you, folks.
Good job, you guys.
That was great.